wondered why the Apostle Paul and Jesus and the disciples ever wrote down some of the things that happened in their lives? I've often thought, well, I wonder what caused these folks to write down the stories and the history and the remembrance of their encounter with Jesus. Was it something that divinely touched them, that they thought that they better get this written down? Was it something that transformed them, that they could no longer allow just their lives to breathe it, but they had to tell the story and keep it going? I think there was a combination of things going on for these early disciples, especially as many of them believed that Jesus would come again in their own lifetime. They truly expected that when Jesus had risen from the dead and had ascended in ascension to heaven, that there would be a moment in their own lifetime when Jesus would physically come again and rescue them from the perils of their own lives, from the perils of slavery, from the perils of Roman domination. And I think they truly believed, and I think that as they got older in their own years, they thought, this isn't quite going according to plan. And if realistically we want to allow the good news of Jesus to be passed on, we need to write these stories down. We need to write our own lives down so that the people who come after us can continue to know Jesus in their own lives and in their own hearts. Now we know the Apostle Paul never really got to meet Jesus. He was a persecutor of the early followers of Jesus. Indeed, before his name was Paul, he was Saul. And there was a transformation that happened in his own life of experience when he got to encounter the reality of Jesus. And it was in that encounter of the reality of Jesus that he became one of the greatest proponents of and promoters of those early followers of Jesus who, remember, were not called a church. They were not called Christians. They moved alongside the synagogues of their own day, and they were the Jesus followers, a good rabbi, a Messiah. And they began to tell their story over and over again, and gradually the Jesus movement, or the Joshua movement, as we would have known it in Jewish history, began to grow and to swell until eventually the rabbis of their own day could no longer allow these Jesus worshippers to be alongside, and eventually they began their own movement, which later on we get to call the Christian church. Now I know that might be something that's new to you. Many of us who grew up in fairly traditional experiences never knew that the early followers of Jesus weren't necessarily Christian. That was some later encounter. And I have to say that I think at times the day was ruined when the Christian church was founded. Because we lost the sense of who Joshua was. We lost the sense of who Jesus is. There was a move to separate Christianity from its Jewish roots. And we know that because they even changed Jesus' name to a Roman name, to Jesus, to a Gentile name. And they changed it so that they could move away from anything that was associated with Jewish faith and Jewish religion. What a sad, sad moment. It always saddens me that the Christians continue to persecute the Jews, and that we continue to have anti-Semitic happenings in our own world when we need to come to a full understanding that Jesus was fully Jewish, and that celebrated all of the Jewish high days and holidays, and he was called Rabbi, Rabboni, it says in Scripture. He was faithful to his Jewish roots and to his Jewish faith. And it would be very silly of us to deny our own Jewish experience for the one that we now follow, called Jesus. Paul, addressing some of these early groups of folks who were following Jesus in those early days, was responding to something that was going on in his own background and in his own tradition. He was responding to his own Jewish background. Paul, as we may know, was possibly a rabbi himself. And Paul was addressing some of the issues that he saw happening in those early followers of Jesus in order for them to remain connected to the one that they called Joshua, Jesus. And he was using Jewish language and Jewish heritage in order for those new believers, some of course who were Gentiles, but enabling them to come to an understanding of where Joshua, Jesus, had come from, and what it was that Jesus had preached and talked about, and that was written down, and that the stories had been handed down from generation and into this very moment. Paul talks about the veil that is removed. And I don't know about you, but when I first read that, when I was a young seminarian, I kind of thought about, well, what kind of veil was that? I know the kind of veils that I see in our world today, those ones that you wear in front of your face. But you see, Paul wasn't talking about that veil. Paul was talking about the veil in the temple in early Jewish history. He was talking about the veil that separated the people from the Holy of Holies. He was talking about the veil that only the high priest was able to enter into on the most highest holy day, the Day of Atonement, when the sacrificial lamb would be offered. He was talking about the veil that separated the people, the ordinary people like you and me, from access to the fullness of the divinity of God. And Paul talks about how that veil is in front of us. It's still there. And it's not enabling us to really see the fullness of what God and who God is in our lives and in this world. I don't know about you, but I actually think that scripture reading could be written for us today. It could be written for us today because I do believe that we too have created a veil that has been put in place that has stopped people from seeing the real Jesus, the real presence of Christ in our world. There are too many lukewarm Christians in our world today. Too many lukewarm people who are happy to fill the pews on Sundays but are not happy to live it out in the world as they know it. There are too many of us who allow that veil to be present and to avoid us from really making a fullness of our commitment of our lives to following Jesus. Now I have to say I understand why. Because to be honest with you, I don't think that the church represents Jesus very well. Just as they didn't represent God very well in those early temples where only the priest could get into the Holy of Holies, I think somehow the church of today has created such dogma and such law, such church law, that avoids and doesn't enable any of us to get through the veil. We see Jesus through the eyes of the preacher rather than seeing Jesus through our own personal experience of the life that should live within us. We see Jesus and repeat Jesus only through what our preachers tell us, rather than what we know of Jesus in our own lives. And I want to tell you, sisters and brothers, there's real danger in only knowing Jesus through the preachers that we have in our churches today. There's real danger because most of our preachers today, I'm a preacher. Most of our preachers today want to hold on to the reality of Jesus for ourselves and want to use our image of Jesus to keep the people in check, to keep having power over the people. We want you to see Jesus through our eyes and through our experience, and we want you to repeat everything that we know and everything we believe. And when I say we, because, we all have our own biases and our own lenses that we see Jesus through. Now, I'm hoping that in this congregation we try to do something different. That's why we're re-examining and recommitting our lives to Jesus today. But the reality is that so often the preaching that we hear today, and I do watch some of those preachers on TV. Heaven forbid. And I do listen to some of those preachers on the radio. And I want to tell you, I spend more time shouting back at my radio and shouting back at the television than I actually spend I spend a lot of time doing other stuff. But the reality is that I find myself in direct conflict